Hey, good evening, everybody. See you're all signing in. Thanks for joining us tonight with our good friends and legends here with Fox and JKS, and of course, the legendary Fred Williams. So this is an incredible honor. It's a great night. And again, thanks for everybody for jumping in. We'll give it just a second. I can still see all the participants pouring in. One quick thing, jump into the chat, tell everybody where you're from. Love to get that chat going. And then also, if you've got questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. We will try to get to all of your questions as we've done in the past of these. But again, thank you so much for being here tonight. And we'll give it just a second. It looks like we're slowing down a little bit, so we will jump right in. Justin, Fred, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Do you guys want to do quick intros on yourselves?
Sure.
Sure. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, Fred's got a much longer resume, so I'll start mine off real short. I work with Sport Truck USA, which is part of the Fox Factory family of brands. I represent JKS Manufacturing, BDS Suspension, Zone Off-Road, Crawl Tech Revolution, and of course we got our good relationship with the guys who make the shocks. So based out of Coldwater, Michigan, you guys are actually hanging out in my garage tonight. So.
I'm Fred Williams. I have been in the off-road industry since the early 2000s. I was a feature editor, tech editor, editor-in-chief, editor-at-large at a magazine called Petersen's Four-Wheel and Off-Road Magazine. And then that kind of spun off into a TV show that I did for about 10 years called Dirt Every Day, where we built a lot of fun projects as part of the Motor Trend and Discovery family. And about a year ago, we kind of wrapped that up. And now I'm out on my own doing YouTube stuff, social media stuff, going to off-road events, and just kind of figuring out my next dream job.
Heck yeah. And one of our best ambassadors too for onX Offroad. So we're so happy to have both of you guys as part of the extended onX Offroad family.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Killer. All right, folks, we'll jump in. So you submitted a bunch of questions. And as always, for these types of things, please, when you sign up, submit your questions in. We want to get to them. And also, like I said, drop them in the Q&A section. We'll answer them live. You've got two absolutely brilliant minds when it comes to off-roading, especially on the suspension side. So if you ever want to ask something, now's your chance. Fred, this is your first time joining us on one of these. So I'll start off with you. You've been partnered with Fox and JKS and the whole all the sport truck brands that Justin mentioned earlier for a while. Like, what's one of the reasons why you like working with them or why you run them on your rigs?
Well, I think I first started working with BDS Suspension years ago when they were one of the sponsors of Ultimate Adventure. And Ultimate Adventure is like this week-long off-road trip that we would do every year at Four-Wheel and Off-Road Magazine. In fact, it's still going on today. I just got some information that we will be getting ready for this year's Ultimate Adventure. So BDS was a sponsor, and then through that kind of collaboration, I started working with JKS, and I met a few guys that worked at Fox, and then the Fox kind of brought BDS into their family. And I've used Fox on a lot of different vehicles. In my role as a magazine editor, I never really work exclusively with one company. But that being said, I've worked with Fox a lot on a lot of my projects. In fact, when I was thinking about this meeting today, I was out running an errand and I was like, well, my summer camp Jeep has Fox shocks on. My rock buggy, my fun buggy has Fox shocks, my Dodge. And I just kind of was like, there's a good percentage of the vehicles that I have built over the years that have Fox shocks on. Some of my flat fenders. It's kind of one of those companies that I've always been able to kind of work with, and even projects that I no longer have. My old Alabama Army truck, which was a fan favorite, and the tug truck, which was a big heavy diesel truck. They were able to help us. And the Mad Max's off-road runner, like that Mad Max style car, that has Fox shocks on it. So I have good relations with the guys that work there. And whenever we show up with some crazy idea, they were always down to help us out and help us figure out what would work. Plus, being magazine guys and TV guys, we were usually like, hey, we need stuff for our project and we need it like next week. So, which I know is hard because the entire world was in like a state of universal back order. But then I feel like Fox has always been there to kind of help us out. And if they could make it happen, they would make it happen. So
love hearing that. And I know, just being a fan, watching those Ultimate Adventure, both the print coverage of it and then ultimately all the videos of it, that's one of the reasons why I switched over and started running all Fox and JKS stuff on my rig. So that was always cool to see. Justin, we've heard a lot from Fred about all the great stuff that he's built and he runs. When you guys are sitting back thinking about lift kits and suspension and all this stuff for any of the vehicles that you sell, like, what makes for a great suspension when y'all are ideating on maybe a new vehicle or a new product line that you're bringing into market?
So for us, it always starts out with the consumer and how we think they're going to use the vehicle. It doesn't hurt that, there's a bunch of gearheads that we work with, we all have our toys and stuff like that. And then we have people like Fred and Holly Fowler and all of our industry friends we work with. So some people might be into go fast. Some people might be into rock crawling. Some people might be into overlanding or, dual purpose, that type of thing. So we start thinking about that customer first and how they're going to use the vehicle. And, from there, you can start building out, right? If you're building a Jeep with lots of up travel and big diameter shocks and, good springs and everything, that's for go fast, right? You hand that to a rock crawler, he's going to be kind of upset with the center of gravity and the ride height, and so when we're designing kits, we're really designing it around how we envision a consumer using it, and then building out options for the others as well.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. And I mean, to me, I know a lot of our fans are running it and I can see it on all the Q&A. So folks, keep throwing those questions in the Q&A. I promise we'll make some time for them at the end and do some awesome answers, but thanks, Justin. I think that helps a ton. One of the other things is I see a lot of questions already from folks that are like, they're just getting started. Where should they be thinking about suspension? Justin, maybe if I can throw it to you first, and then Fred, if you can follow up on that. Like, if I'm just getting into the off-roading hobby, what would you tell me?
Yeah, be honest with yourself about what you're going to do, right? I mean, you can take your vehicle out stock right now and go play on a couple of trails, and you're going to learn really fast what you want, what you don't want. Biggest thing is, obviously do your research, join some off-road groups, join some off-road clubs, ask some questions, come to things like this, obviously get some knowledge around you about what you want to do with your vehicle, and don't hesitate to call manufacturers. I know, at JKS and at BDS and Zone, we do a great job of having people ready to talk, on the phone with you. I always want you to call our brands, but I'll be honest with you, the whole off-road industry is like that. We're here. We want to talk to people. We want to, help enthusiasts get into the sport and enjoy the products, reach out, contact people. But the main thing, the one I talk to people most about at shows and events that are just getting started out is you might see this wicked rock crawler, running Pritchett Canyon in Moab. Don't assume you're just going to grab it and go do that, right? Let's start, with being honest with ourselves about what's local to us, what we're going to use the vehicle for, and plan your compromises from there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that one of the things that a lot of people do is they just want to start modifying the vehicle and spending money before they learn driver skills. But at the same time, I think there are things that we all, like, a lot of people get into this sport or this hobby because they love how vehicles look that are lifted and have more aggressive tires or bigger tires. And so a lot of times coming back to bigger tires or more aggressive tires is the thing that kind of drives people right off the bat. They're like, I just bought this Jeep. I want to lift it and make it look cooler. And it's like, okay, well, are you going off-roading or you just want to look cooler? Oh yeah, I want to get into off-roading too. And it's like, okay, well, everything that you do is like a domino effect. You go to a more aggressive tire, you'll have a tire noise. You go to a bigger tire, the tire is going to get into the body. You also have heavier tires. So then you're dealing with unsprung weight And people are like, well, I just want to lift it, and I need to lift it 10 inches. It's like, well, do you really need to lift it that much? Then your center of gravity gets off. And it's funny because it's like people will just dive right into it. They get so enthusiastic. And sometimes you have to like pump the brakes a little bit, drive the vehicle the way it is, and start looking around at what other trucks are out there. Like, how did that guy build his? How does her Jeep work off-road? How does her truck work off-road? And I think then you kind of start realizing like, oh, well, if I want to do this type of four-wheeling, I don't need to be as tall. And if I want to do this type of four-wheeling, I need shocks that are going to deal with like a lot of movement if I'm going fast across the desert. And the cool thing about the off-road industry and the off-road community is that like there's tons of people that'll start sharing ideas with you. And you just have to kind of look at what other people are doing with their vehicles and the ones that are working in your arena, and start maybe asking that guy or that person, how is your vehicle set up so that it works best in this type of terrain? I think one of the things, like when we start talking about shocks and people are building custom rigs, they instantly want to go to the biggest shock they can get. They're like, oh, well, Fox makes a 16. I probably need that. And I don't know how many times Dave and I have been building stuff online, and we're like, you can build a rig that's really capable with 10-inch shocks or 11-inch shocks. And a lot of times people start getting into like these enormous shocks, and they don't really realize how much of a detriment that'll be if the entire vehicle isn't engineered around a larger suspension. So I think what we're saying is, before you pull out your wallet or pull out your wrenches, look around and talk to other people that do the type of trails you like to do. Do you like to haul a bunch of stuff and go overlanding? Do you like to just bomb across the dune and jump your truck out at Pismo or Glamis? And then you'll be able to kind of reverse engineer what your friends are doing and start applying that to your own vehicle.
No, I think that's great advice from both of you guys. And the cool thing is, at least in my humble opinion, is the off-road community is so welcoming. So as you're trying to figure things out and get your questions answered, even if you're a really advanced off-roader and you're trying to break into one of the new segments that you both called out, just ask questions. Like, everybody's pretty friendly. We want everybody to have a great time out there and keep beautiful places like Pismo open. So that's a really good thing. Fred, I got one for you. So you've wheeled in some really amazing places, some incredible rigs. Like, I guess, what have been some of your favorite stories coming out of Ultimate Adventure? Can you give us a little bit of a sense of just what that is for those of us that haven't been on it with you?
Well, I'm going to preface this with the fact that for probably the first 8 or 10 years that I went on Ultimate Adventure, I rarely was driving. My job at the magazine was to build the Ultimate Adventure vehicle for certain years, but then I would hand the keys over to Rick Payway. He would do the driving, and I would run around the woods taking pictures. So I have been to a lot of awesome locations. I have hiked a lot of awesome trails that I wished I was wheeling. But the thing about Ultimate Adventure is it's an adventure where you basically live out of the most extreme 4x4 that you can put together. But it has to be able to run down the highway and stay together as a group, and then run the toughest trails that you can find. Now, we usually get about 25 rigs on this trip, 2 people per vehicle. So you got about 50 people, and we pick a different location every year and try to not repeat destinations every year. Sometimes you have to, but I mean, we've been all over the lower 48. We've been to Alaska, and you basically live out of your truck. And to me, it's a lot of fun because like you drive a vehicle with like no doors or half doors. You're just kind of out in the element. You're camping out. Something breaks, everybody dives in to help fix it. You're living out of your cooler. You're camping out, and then like by the end of the week, when you roll into that final hotel, like there's no shower as good as the shower after you've been wheeling and wrenching and like living out in the dirt for a week straight. But that being said, like that's all kind of part of the fun. You have to bring tools, spares, food, camping gear, all of that stuff. It's kind of like extreme overlanding before overlanding was even a thing. We would just pile a bunch of stuff in our vehicles, and you have to kind of figure out how much stuff do you really need and how much stuff is like overkill, because you don't. There was a guy one year, he brought everything in the kitchen sink, and we were out at some sand dunes and people were jumping their rigs, and he was like, I want to do that. And the next thing you know, his front axle was bent, and we were all trying to figure out how to get a broken truck out of the sand dunes. And part of the problem is like people think, oh, it's Ultimate Adventure, I need to bring everything that could possibly fail. And it's like, well, just bring a few of the things, and then you'll figure out the rest. Like, we've had guys buy junkyard engines and swap them in camps at night. We've had drive shafts rebuilt along the way. We've had axle suspensions cobbled back together. So it's kind of more of a just go for the adventure, go for the can-do attitude, and we'll figure it out. Oh, that's the other thing. When you're an attendee on Ultimate Adventure, you have no idea where you're going. You know where you're going to start, and you know where you're going to end. And in the middle, it's just an unknown. And you'll wake up every day, and the guys in charge will be like, all right, load up. We need enough fuel for 300 miles today. Or like, leave all your camping gear here. We're just going to go four-wheeling today, and we're going to come right back to this spot. So it's always part of that adventure. It's just kind of the unknown.
That's awesome. No, I think that's super helpful just for anybody that wants to go out wheeling. It's just get out there and kind of get that experience in and have some good friends along the way to help you out. So
I think that's the other thing is, like, there's so many people that approach me and they're like, I want to go on Ultimate Adventure. And I'm like, you could do it with your friends. You could just pick 3 off-road parks or 3 really cool off-road destinations around you and load up your vehicles and just drive to those spots, like convoy together. We've driven some really ridiculous stuff down the highway, and you would think that we would be getting pulled over all the time. But I think because we're in a convoy, we're not speeding. We're all just kind of like this weird parade of circus freaks in their like rock crawlers and mud trucks, and with all their camping gear hanging off the side. Like, the county mounties usually let us alone, or they just look at us and kind of keep an eye on us, but they don't pull us all over, because it's probably more paperwork than it's worth to try and give tickets to 25 crazy guys in their trucks.
No, I love hearing that. And for everybody listening, comment in the chat if you want to maybe see an onX class about how to plan your ultimate adventure. As hopefully everybody here knows, we've got 650,000 miles of trails and a bunch of off-road parks that can help you get there. So throw something in the comments. Maybe we can do that again. It's a great idea, Fred.
Well, onX has been a sponsor of Ultimate Adventure for the past couple of years. So, and it's definitely a tool that we as attendees have used. Especially, there's like a group of there's different groups in the Ultimate Adventure. There's the staff, there's the sponsors, there's our invited readers, and then there's this group of guys called the cronies, who are like the guys that are invited back every year. And those guys definitely use the onX app because they're trying to like hop around and fix people and help people get back on the road, but also kind of herd all the cats of 25 rigs to get to our next destination.
Killer. All right, let's talk a little more suspension, guys. And Justin, I know I've got a couple of questions coming in about leaf springs. And Fred, I know you're at least if I remember correctly, you're a YJ fan. So hopefully not a fan.
I'm not a YJ fan, but I have leaf springs underneath my clampy Toyota, which is a crowd favorite. And I don't have anything against leaf springs. In fact, my only problem with YJs is the square headlights. Like, the rest of it, I think, is a perfect vehicle. They're great Jeeps. They work great off-road. It's kind of like XJs. I'm also like, I've had an XJ. I've had a couple YJs. They're just not my favorite vehicle. But I don't always. But if you knew my friends, they would tell you I have a different favorite vehicle every day, because I send them a different Facebook Marketplace listing every day of the vehicle I have to have. So
there you go. Justin, for those folks that maybe have a leaf spring setup in their off-road rig, like, what would you talk to them about? What would you recommend from a JKS side?
So on the JKS side, obviously that's actually we'll pull over to BDS a little bit. So JKS really got into that sway bar quicker disconnect and adjustable track bars when the XJs came out, right? So, what we did there is, quick secret, XJ's wheels so good because they got the front of a TJ and the back of a YJ. That's why the wheel's so good, right? But leaf spring on the BDS side, some of the biggest things you can do is you got to look at the number of leaves, the thickness of leaf, and everything else. They also don't like a really aggressive shock, right? So you got to think about when we're using leaf springs, man, if I can find some old hydro shocks, no big nitrogen charge, big reservoirs, things like that, they work best with that just because there's no nitrogen pressure slowing down their movement before they get things rolling, right? I like to do, I manipulate leaf spring packs a lot. So, YJ is one of my favorite thing to do to an old CJ is a BDS YJ conversion. All that is a wider, thinner leaf pack with more leaves in it, which we get better ride quality, which associates to more flex, more articulation. Chevy truck, 63-inch rear leaf springs. We actually cut a Ford Ranger in half and put 63-inch rear leaf springs in the back of it. That's like an industry standard, right? That's just something you use. The length is right. So there's tons and tons of tuning that goes into leaf springs. The length, the shackle angle, thickness, number of leaves, all those things, they can be dialed in infinitely. There's tons of technology. You look at places like Deaver and things like that are go fast with them. So if your rig came with leaf springs, don't see that as a limitation. I have been driven right around in, some of the fanciest JKs you've ever seen with a YJ or a XJ. The driver modification is always the best one. The second best one is knowing your rig and knowing your geometry, knowing what it can and can't do. Shock length, down travel, things like that are really important to watch with leaf springs, but they can absolutely be made to wheel and wheel hard.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. So Stephen, they definitely still have a place. Hopefully that answered your questions, and talk to the experts at BDS. Like, there are a ton of options that these guys have. Justin, do we want to talk a little bit about the rig behind you and the way you've got that suspension set up on there? That might be a good way to
sure
old and new.
Sure. Yeah. And so we talk about, JLs and TJs and JKs and the evolution of Jeep, right? And, kind of what's going on with Jeep and where JKs are living right now, right? So in the industry, JKs, you can still get a 2018 JK. That's still a very expensive vehicle. But the rig behind me is actually a 2007. And if you open up the door and look at the build date, it was actually built in 2006. She's a OG JK. And that is set up with a JKS front coilover conversion with a 10-inch travel 2.5 coilover. And kind of to Fred's point earlier, could we stuff a 12-inch 2.0 in there? Yeah, we could, but the wheel travel we're going to get isn't enough to offset the benefit of that 2.5 diameter coilover with the DSC adjuster. That bigger shock and the more adjustability in the DSC is just overall better for how we use that Jeep than the 2.0. Also, when I see these coilover conversions and they're going in a JK or a TJ or a JL or something like that, if we're using factory track bar locations front and rear, right, there's only so much you can do with it. You can put a 20-inch travel coilover in there. The track bar mount's only going to let things move so far. Eventually drive shafts are going to hit fuel tanks in the rear, and things are going to connect in the front. I call that dirty wheel travel. So to have wheel travel that looks really cool on a flex ramp or, does a killer CTI number, but actually has no form or function on the trail is kind of wasted, right? So at JKS, we focus on good, clean wheel travel and the ultimate in tunability. I'm taking a look at that. Can I fit a 12-inch travel 2.5 in there? Because I'd actually like to raise it up a little bit. I'm starting to want to go faster at my age right now. I don't know what's going on. I co-drove King of the Hammers once, and all of a sudden now I just want to go fast in everything I ride in. So the 4 or 5 inches of up travel it has now is fantastic. I should be absolutely happy with that. I want 7. Right. But I still want all my down travel. So there's stuff like that. So that rig right now, like I said, it's set up at 3.5 inches of lift. It's got 5.5 inches of up travel, and, plenty of down travel. I have driven that from Coldwater, Michigan out to Hurricane, out to Sand Hollow, and wheeled there and driven it home, just the way it's set up. It's running a 3.5-inch spring and 2.5 shock in the rear. It's just a really great kind of universal Jeep. We'll drive that thing anywhere. The wife and I will. We literally just a couple weeks ago through the onX app on the screen, took off from our house and went back roading for like 150 miles just to see what we could find by our house. No top, in the rain, just to have a little mini ultimate adventure. Fred will know this guy. Carter Reed started that on Facebook that morning. He posted up a photo of the old Zone MJ and all, kind of linking back to ultimate adventure. My wife and I were like, all right, let's go do one today. So.
Killer.
It really doesn't take a whole lot of planning. You just have to have a few tools, have a good cooler, and grab your onX app or a map and just go exploring. I would recommend you take a few friends because that's more fun. And that's kind of the number one rule of off-roading is like, if you take some other people, then somebody's there to drag you home if you have catastrophic failure. But I think that a lot of people don't realize just how easy those types of adventures can be.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I think both of you guys are testaments of it. Fred, in some of your rigs that I know I've seen you build on dirt every day, you built some really wild coilover setups and built them from scratch, really. How do you think about it when you're going in and setting up those things and then taking it out for a test drive and shaking it down? Like, what are some of the criteria that you go through and look at?
Well, one of the things about any dirt every day or television show project is that you're usually on a timeline to actually get it done. Sure. There were many times where Dave and I would be working on a project and we would have different ideas of what direction we should go with it. And then we would just kind of come to the conclusion that we have to pick the idea that we can get done the quickest. So, and we made stuff work. I mean, everything had to work at the end of the episode. At least most of the things had to work. They had to go wheeling. But there were times where we were like, well, we'll come back and fix this later because we need to get a TV show done. I think that our build style has always kind of been, don't lift it too extremely high. Try to keep it pretty moderate for the type of trail wheeling, rock crawling, street driving, all of that. Like, the lower you can keep the center of gravity, the less lift. You can get away with a pretty moderate lift if you have locking differentials and gears, because even if you lift a tire, you can still drive through it when you have locking differentials. Sure. That being said, like, I have, like, my Toyota clampy truck has leaf springs front and rear, and the rear is spring under, and it'll flex all over the place. And it doesn't have a ton of up travel because it's kind of more of a rock crawler, but you can build a leaf spring truck to go fast. You can obviously build a coil spring truck to do a little bit of everything, as can be seen in like the different road racing. I think the idea behind switching from coils with a second shock versus going to a coil over shock is that it's sometimes easier to package all of that if you're building something custom. You really just have to come up with the lower mount and the upper mount and some sort of shock hoop and a way to support the upper mount on the chassis. And that is often easier than trying to mount an airbag or a coil and a secondary shock next to it, or a leaf spring and a secondary shock next to it. So plus the performance attributes of coilovers, it surpasses the coil and shock and the leaf spring at a certain point. I mean, you can start out and one rig can have coilovers and the other rig can be on coils and just a secondary shock, and they'll be neck and neck for a lot of the trail. And it's not, and that's the other thing, it's not competition, but like at a certain point, having the ability to tune the shock and tune the coils and do it easier by removing the whole unit and putting it back in is definitely a pro to having coilover shocks versus having coils or leaf springs and a secondary shock.
Okay. I've got one for both of you guys. I'd be curious to get both of your perspectives on it. We had a few questions that came in around independent front suspension for some of the folks. I know we've talked a lot about stick axle vehicles. How do you go about thinking about those when folks are maybe doing their full size truck, or they're thinking about setting up their rig that isn't a stick axle rig for going off roading?
I'll take
go
the
ahead,
first swing at it. Yeah. So kind of the same principle, what are we going to do with it? We start looking at tire size. There's a lot that goes into IFS. Our IFS engineers at Sport Truck, they're brilliant minds. And one of them threatened me to be on this tonight and asked me a question I couldn't answer. So I'm watching for him. But there's just so much more geometry that goes into that, because now you have ball joint angles, you have CV angles and plunge, as the CV moves throughout the range of motion. So all the things we have on a stick axle, as far as bump stop locations, and tire clearance, and, full max turn lock to lock, you have all of that and then some on IFS, right? So the biggest things I find are, the knuckle replacements, in a lot of IFS kits, if we're doing drop cross member, we get into knuckle replacements, is making sure that the knuckle isn't compromised in such a way that it was cheap to make, but sacrificed ball joint angle. Because even at ride height or, going down the road, we want a neutral ball joint angle as far as the ball joint's range of motion. I kind of, quite frankly, don't care about the angle of the control arm. I see a lot of that on social media. Oh, the angle is flat or this. That's great. We'll take that. I really want to look at the ball joint itself. How is it positioned? Is it neutral in its range of motion? Uniballs, things like that. Uniballs don't live here in Michigan. You put uniballs on something you only wheel at the off-road park. That type of stuff doesn't live through a winter here without having to, do major surgery on it all the time. So we focus on ball joints. So ball joint angles. And then from there, we look at the steering, systems. We know Chevy IFS trucks and, the Broncos, we're seeing it. We got to watch tie rod angles. We got to watch stresses we put on those things. So all those things really come down to the knuckle design. And then if we're keeping the OE knuckle, it's really important on the upper or lower control arm, or both, if we're replacing them, all the angles. So geometry is of the utmost important. We only want to use high quality parts and, work. And this is somewhere where we don't go cheap. We don't make a vehicle taller in IFS and think it's going to perform. You can put a spring spacer on a stick axle vehicle and kind of put some 35s on it and get away with it. That's not something you do on an IFS vehicle. Back in the day, cranking up torsion bars, all that stuff, you're getting poor ride quality, poor performance, everything about it. So this is an area you want to spend some money on this one for sure. And Fox coilovers every time.
I think there was a time, probably the early 2000s, where everybody was trying to figure out how to do a 4-link suspension. And now, like, IFS is like adding 2 more 4-link suspensions to your vehicle. Like, you're now trying to not only figure out how the back of the vehicle is going to work, but these arms up front, and like, what are they going to do? And I'm really excited about kind of don't get me wrong, I'm a solid axle guy through and through, but I love seeing the technology that is coming to all of the independent suspension, whether it's in these kind of performance OEM vehicles, whether it's like the Raptor or the TRX, or like the ZR2 coming from GM, or at the other end of the spectrum, like what the different teams are doing in like King of the Hammers, Ultra 4 type racing. The fact that there's like trophy trucks running 4-wheel drive and portal boxes is so cool to me, because 20 years ago, like, all of that stuff was just a pipe dream. And now it's like, all right, people are investing in it and diving into it and figuring it all out. And I don't think that Jeep should ever go away from the solid front axle. But I also think that it's great to see that the competitors in the off-road industry are like really upping their game in the independent front suspension arena.
Love hearing that. And yeah, for everybody in the chat, comment away for, we'll let Jim Morrison know about that stick axle coming from Fred if you agree. So, well, cool. No, I think that's awesome insight, especially as we have seen that kind of pervasive growth of independent front suspension in these OEM vehicles. And as those age and continue to hit the secondary market, it's going to be great to see what, the aftermarket does with it. I'm sure Justin, you and your crew are just dreaming away about all the cool things that you can help us get more capable with. It
is nonstop fun to see what our guys are doing with, the Bronco, right, is obviously a really hot topic over there, and seeing the stuff that's I can't show you, but man, you want to see it. It's super cool. And what it's doing is it's actually bleeding back into the Chevy 1500s, the Ram 1500s, the F-150s. It's going all through there, and we all knew it would. And, Jeep kind of threatened us with the JL, or there was a hot second back then. We were like, oh my gosh, the JL could be IFS, right? And we always kind of joked at Sport Truck, like, we're actually ready, because we do play in this stuff so much. So we embrace all that stuff, both from we'll slap a solid axle into a brand new Bronco to where we'll cycle 14 inches of travel out of a Chevy half ton. We're excited for both.
Killer. Guys, I have a ton of questions, but I will say for everybody that's here and in the chat, thank you for throwing all your questions in the Q&A. There are a lot of them, and I would love to throw a few of these out to you guys here cold. So you feel good?
Go for it.
Heck yeah.
I'll get up and get a drink if I don't know the answer.
Check. We'll figure it out. So one of the ones that came in is an FJ Cruiser. We've got Ron asking in, what are some of the best shocks and maybe suspension setups in that realm that you guys have seen?
I built an FJ Cruiser for Ultimate Adventure, and we pretty much cut all the independent front suspension out from under it.
Stick axle conversion. Got it.
But that at the same time, I have an 03 4Runner, and it has Fox shocks under it. We used a long travel suspension from a different company, not BDS. It's actually the Marlin Crawler guys who are working on independent front suspension that are set up for rock crawling. But that has Fox shocks on it. And I think to the point of independent front suspension, like Justin was saying, it's all about keeping like the ball joints and the axle joints happy. I ran the RCV axle shafts in my 4Runner just for additional strength and angle. But it kind of comes back to, what do you want to do with the vehicle? How big a tire do you want to run? Do you want to wheel this thing, or is it just kind of a pavement pounder that you want it to look cooler? Or do you want like thousands and thousands of off-road overlanding miles with tons and tons of weight on top of it?
Fair.
Yeah. And also with those guys, I know we focus on the front, but I'm not saying we've modified some JKS Jeep, maybe JK upper and lower control arms that start really helping out that 5-link for strength in the rear. So you can definitely stuff Jeep parts on a Toyota if you're trying hard enough.
Good tip. One that I know we've had on some of the past calls that we've done, and there's a ton of them today, is talking full-size truck rigs. So there lots of questions in and around that. Shane was asking about his 2007 F-150, and he wants to lift it 4 inches, he calls out. What options do you have for Shane and his lift for his F-150?
Yeah, so Shane, we can go either way, BDS or zone, and get you covered. I'm guessing you're looking for about a 35-inch tire there. And we've got, obviously, we're looking at a 4-inch drop crossmember lift. We have to drop the crossmember at that point to get the front differential, basically for the same reasons we talked about, for proper geometry. And in that case, like I said, we're going to do about a 3.5 to 4-inch drop crossmember, knuckle replacement that's going to relocate ball joint angles. We do an upper control arm in both zone or BDS. And again, we have options to reuse your factory strut, or we have Fox, upgrade options as well. It'll go back to what you want to do with the truck. If you're just getting it lifted, if you called and said, hey, I just want to run big tires, obviously I can talk to you about all the ride benefits of the Fox upgrades. But there's obviously the compromise that's in the wallet, right? So if your wallet says, I just need to get bigger, let's do it with proper geometry and maintain OE ride quality and performance. If your wallet says, I want that plus some additional performance, then we get into the Fox product as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hopefully that helped. Here's another one on coilovers. So Michael's asking about mounting coilovers on a link suspension. What kind of angles are we looking for when setting them up? Optimal front to back and side to side, or just make them clear? So a little more instruction, I think, on getting it set up and switching it over.
So you could talk to 20 builders and probably get 10 to 12 different responses. And for me, a lot of it depends on packaging, right? Packaging is going to dictate so much of that. When I've built things in the past and our engineers build stuff on the front, we try to get as close to vertical as possible, just because deflection or angles, change the tuning characteristics so much. So packaging on the front of a JK or JL, we can get very, very close to vertical. I don't mind a little bit of tip in at the top, meaning if you're looking at the front of the Jeep to see a little tip in, that's not too bad at all, especially with the track bar allows things to move a little bit. That's fine. Just big lean back or lean forward. If we can stay away from, especially lean forward, lean back, it just changes spring rates and all the tuning characteristics, right? So packaging allow, especially in the front, straight up and down. The rear, that really depends. Packaging is such a nightmare back there. Everybody's seen a JK or JL where that thing's laying back on like a 30-degree angle, just to get the length in there. And really that goes back to coilover tuning and what makes a coilover great. They can be tuned to work that way. And if packaging dictates, so be it. If packaging doesn't dictate it, I'm a big fan of a hole saw right through the bed and have that thing sticking up and mounted up there, straight up and down in a 1-to-1 ratio. It's going to be easier to tune for your shock guy. That's for sure.
Cool. Yeah. There was a time when you would crawl under a Toyota and the tops of the shocks were touching because that helped it flex better. And I think we're getting to the point now. Well, I can tell a story where, like, once I was at the magazine and I wanted to write the article of how to build a 4-link suspension, which was like, nobody did that back then. It was kind of like a new thing. And I went to some of the best suspension guys at different race teams. And the answer that probably made the most sense was, there's not a recipe. There's some ideas that you'll aim towards, but if you're starting with a vehicle that's a factory vehicle, it's all about what's going to fit. And that's what Justin's referring to when he talks about packaging. It's like, well, you might want the shock to be vertical above the axle, but it's probably not going to fit there, or it's not going to fit inside the frame, or not going to fit outside. So it's going to be a little bit of let's try this engineering in order to get everything exactly where you want it.
For sure. Fred, we've got a couple that came in about shock rebuilding, and I'm curious because you have beat the heck out of some vehicles. When do you start thinking about when to rebuild those shocks? And Justin, I know you've got some expert advice on how to actually make that come to life too.
I mean, I'm notorious for not getting them redone. I am not a shock rebuilder. There are a lot of great companies out there that do rebuild shocks. I know it seems like a lot of the race teams will find the shock rebuilding companies and go to them, but I don't know that a lot of the end users are taking them in and getting them rebuilt as much as they probably could for better tuning of their suspension. And that's the other thing, like the shocks will show up and they'll have some dials on them, and people they'll play with them for a day or two and then they just kind of set it and forget it. And I think that there's a lot more technology and information there that people could dive into if they had the opportunity to work with Fox or any of the other aftermarket tuning agencies.
Yeah. And, to go along with that, for rebuilds, a lot of times, especially on the racing side of things. So if we think off-road racing, we're literally boiling fluid over there, right? I mean, the best fluid in the world hates King of the Hammers. That is just a ridiculous thing to try to do. So the fluid is actually broken down, at the end of, a long, long race like that. So that is a lot of times why those guys are rebuilding. Daily drivers and weekend warriors, kind of those dual purpose rigs, a lot of it depends on what you're wheeling in, right? If you play in a lot of mud, that's going to get grit and nasty up around the wiper seals and blow those seals out, you're going to rebuild more often than someone who just daily drives every day and never plays around in that, right? The terrain actually plays a part in that. The other thing is if you just rock crawl, just slow speed rock crawl, full compression, full extension, you know, that type of thing, the shock is getting warm. Don't get me wrong. You can heat up a shock doing that. But compared to somebody who's playing in the sand dunes all day long for hours on end, that's cooking shock fluid, you know, a lot of it depends on that end user. But I would say if you, again, it's hard for me because I'm in the Midwest. Nate, I know you're in the Midwest. We have wheeling seasons here. Wintertime is rebuild time, right? Yeah. If you live in a place where you have wheeling seasons, let's pull those shocks out, swap out fluid. Hey, maybe you want to send it off to one of those supporting companies to, you know, add a touch of this, or you had a conversation with someone like an AccuTune or Fox or something like that, and maybe change a shim stack, that type of thing for sure. For you guys get to wheel 12 months out of the year, I actually don't like you, so I don't care. You know, no, honestly, watch your shocks. They'll tell you a tale too. You know, shocks, it's not abnormal for them to seep a little bit, have a little dirt sticking to some fluid. That's not an issue, right? But if they start dripping, we got seals, we need rebuilds.
Cool. One of the other ones that's come in a couple of times now is the external reservoir shocks and set up in that system and how you do that. Just while we're talking shock, and I know we've got some other suspension or other spring rate stuff, I guess, what's the school of thought there? Are there any rules of thumb that you would recommend to folks?
So there's a couple things about that, right? So the external reservoir, the first thing you have to do is you got to sort out, do I need this for performance or do I think it looks cool? You know, and yes, it's okay to admit to yourself, you just think it looks cool and you want it. We want what we want as human beings. That's fine, right? What I tell people, once they get past that, they're like, do I need one? Go out, do your wheeling, do your hardest wheeling, throw it in park, hop out, grab your shock. If you can hold your hand on that shock at the end of your hardest wheeling, you don't need a reservoir. If you can't, it's time to start shopping, okay? Sure. The other thing is external reservoir on a Fox shock moves the internal floating piston to the reservoir. What's neat about that is we now get the entire shock body for wheel travel. So we can get a little bit more wheel travel out of the same shock by making an external reservoir. So these are, you know, usually the answer's in your paycheck, right? It's in your wallet, whether you want or don't want. But as far as determining if you need, my simple test is, like I said, if you can hold your hand on it, you probably don't need it.
Yeah, I think that the thing that people may not understand is that the shock is basically like a plunger moving through oil. And when it does that, it heats up the oil. So the more oil you have, the more the heat can be dissipated. And so the heat not only goes out the body of the shock, but also out the reservoir through the body of the reservoir. And the more oil you can carry and the more surface area to release that heat is going to make the shock last longer and work better, like at the higher speeds if you're going.
Cool. I think that hopefully that helps. So Warwick, William, all you folks that have been asking those questions, hopefully that gives you some guidance. I love the cool to the touch method after your hardest day of wheeling. That's as simple as even a slow guy like me can understand it. So love it. Killer. Fred, when you were, and as you still continue to build vehicles, you pick some really crazy rigs, I would say, at least. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of what's your thought process when you're out scouting and you're on Facebook Marketplace? Like I know most of us spend some good time on every day when you're picking out your next big project.
I definitely take a lot of influence from other vehicles I see. Like a lot of the vehicles that I built over the years for Ultimate Adventure, especially like the Jeep-based vehicles, were kind of my iteration of something that I had seen the Jeep designer Mark Allen come up with. So like we built a JK with a Cummins diesel in it. And years before that, there was this massive Jeep Wrangler Rescue concept. That crazy double-ended JK that everybody thought was insane was actually me trying to build the Jeep Hurricane concept out of a JK. And that's why it had front and rear steer, it had front and rear Jeep grills. So I think a lot of times, like, I will see something and I'll be like, I like that. How can I make it? And how can I twist it around a little bit to be something that, like, my TJ is obviously direct descendant of the Jeeps that Chris Durham had built over the years, something low. And then doing the diesel conversion, Chris would never do that because he's a horsepower guy. He might do it, but he's probably not. He would always go for a V8, where I was like, let's play with this diesel. So I think a lot of times the vehicles start out as just an idea that we see in somebody else's vehicle. And then we're like, all right, I have this and I want it to be something like that. How can I start with what I have? And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm in the mode of like finishing projects and unloading them and getting them out there to people that can play with them for the next generation, and then finding new stuff that I'm going to bring home and start on new projects. So kind of weeding through my old magazine projects and dirt everyday projects and sending them down the road. And then I can kind of start fresh with some new stuff.
Killer. Yeah. Garage space always becomes an issue for this hobby. That's for sure.
Yeah. The more you have, the more stuff you have.
That very true. Justin, I've had a bunch of questions coming in from folks that I would say aren't as hardcore rock crawlers, a lot of overlanding. We've also got a lot of hunters in, for anybody that doesn't know on this call. We've got an onX Hunt product too. But they're talking about adding bumpers and winches and just some of that basic self-recovery gear. What is your recommendation as they're thinking about building up their suspension as they kind of, I guess, transform their vehicle to be built for what they're going to end up using it for?
Yeah, and I was kind of watching the chat and kind of touching on that when we start adding winches and bumpers and recovery gear, and some people talking about some body roll, that they were getting, right? Yeah. So obviously, as we go taller, we change the center of gravity, right? So maybe we didn't lift, so if we just add weight to a stock vehicle, we can start talking about, increasing sway bar diameter, or, in Fox's case, especially, we'll get a shock with a little bit more compression adjustment, high and low speed, that really, really helps with that body roll, especially adjusting that low speed compression on a DSC on a Fox shock. That'll eliminate a ton of that slow moving body roll, just as we get some more compression in there. But as we go taller, then we start stacking on weight. Okay, so we've raised our center of gravity and we piled a whole bunch of weight on top of the springs, right? So it starts, acting like a teeter-totter, and then we as off-roaders start getting stereotyped as tipping over all the time. So again, we go back to, sway bar diameters, stiffening up sway bars, right? Doesn't feel the best, to have a super stiff sway bar on a lightweight rig, but on a really heavy rig, look at, is there an aftermarket sway bar for that full size truck? And I seen somebody was asking about a JT, a Gladiator JT. That thing has a super soft sway bar in the rear, but we as off-road enthusiasts assume that because it has a bed, it will definitely hold 2,000 pounds worth of gear and have a 4-inch lift, right?
Yep.
Take a look at a stiffer sway bar. Definitely look at, some of the adjustable shock options out there. I'll stay with the Fox because that's who signs my paycheck, but you want a compression adjustment. We need to be able to tighten up that compression. You've added weight above and beyond what everything was designed for. You're putting more pressure on the shock. You're putting more pressure on the spring. We need something that can increase that capacity for movement. Yep. More compression adjustment when we go that route.
Killer. Perfect. There are a bunch more questions that we won't have time to get to because, my goodness, this hour has absolutely flown by. Before we cut out, though, I want to throw it to both of you guys. You're obviously at a ton of events. You get to talk to a lot of us that are just off-road enthusiasts. Like, what are some of the most common questions that you guys get that you'd want to be able to message out to everybody here live? And then, of course, when we release the recording on YouTube.
The most common.
I've got one if you want to think for a second, Fred.
Yeah, go for it.
The biggest one I get is people always come up to me at the booth, right? And they say, oh man, I don't go off-road and I don't need this fancy stuff. And my response is always this. And I say this knowing, looking right in the mirror, any idiot can make a vehicle wheel well off-road. I can make, that thing a slinky off-road, take about $10, remove a bunch of crap off it. Any idiot can do that. Driving to and from the trail comfortably or on your daily commute, that's where your money comes in. So, while yes, we show you all the amazing things the suspension is capable of, it is capable of that, but the dual purposes of it is where the engineering and the design and so much of that comes from. And so that's like my number one thing at shows and events. Oh, I don't need this fancy stuff because I don't go off-roading. I'm like, you need it more than that guy does, because that's all he does is go off-roading. He doesn't care how it rides and drives. So that's my favorite one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think to add to that, a lot of people will, they'll get all worked up about how expensive coil-over shocks are or custom suspension. And it's like, well, you're asking this vehicle to safely drive you to work. And you can do these things cheaper, but you're going to reduce the performance, especially the on-road performance. It's like the off-road performance, we kind of get by because we're like, well, it's all right. It's kind of my cheap off-road vehicle. And when you have a newer, nicer something that you're driving, you'll probably want to invest a bit more into the suspension and the shocks and everything like that. So I don't know that I have one question that a lot of people ask. I think that getting into the off-road hobby, as we would call it, it's a great way for people to kind of learn about mechanical stuff. So if you have kids and they're spending way too much time on TV or computers, get them out in the shop, show them how to wrench on stuff. And even if it's your daughter, there's a lot of guys that are like, oh, my daughter's not interested in this. It's the number of women that I see that are in the off-road scene these days, it's exploding. It's kind of like never before. So I think it's great to see, I love going to events and talking to kids, handing out stickers and getting kids excited. I think a lot of us get into the off-road world because we're a little kid and we just see a truck with big tires. And as you get older, you realize the big tires are just a part of the whole recipe to make off-roading so much fun. So
that's awesome. No, and great tips from both of you guys. And Fred, you've got a lot of requests in here for selling that Bigfoot hat that's on your head. So.
Oh, it's coming. I've been working on setting up a store for swag, and it's definitely on its way. I'm learning that I'm much better at being out in the shop than setting up stuff on the computer. But I have some people that I'm going to work with to get that set up so that people can order hats and stickers and other cool swag.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think you'll have a lot of orders coming from the fans here tonight. Justin, Fred, what an incredible hour. Thank you both for carving out so much of your time and for repping Fox, JKS, BDS, Zone, all the great suspension brands. Well, Justin, just tapping into your brain, and Fred, you as well, just giving us some of your insights and some of your stories. Absolutely incredible. For all the fans, thanks for carving out some time in your night this summer to jump on this and hear from the experts in the space. And again, thanks for being a part of onX Offroad Elite Week and checking this out. Justin, Fred, where can we find you guys? Anything else you want to plug before we go?
Yeah, so jksmfg.com, bdssuspension.com, and of course, ridefox.com. That's our home. It's our social media. I'm actually running our social media right now while someone's out of the office. So if you message one of our brands on Instagram or Facebook, you might be talking to me or Carter Reed. So we can kind of be tapped for some more of that Q&A right there. We're always happy to do that.
Heck yeah.
And I'm online at 4x Fred Williams, 4x Fred Williams. I have a YouTube channel where I'm constantly working on new videos, Instagram, Facebook, and all of those outlets. So feel free to send me messages if you have questions about your project trucks, send them over. It may turn into a video that I'll do in the future, or maybe I'll just try to answer as many questions as I can. So track me down.
Heck yeah. That's what the off-road community is all about. Guys, thanks again. Have a great evening. And again, thanks for being a part of the onX brand and being elite partners. We really do appreciate it.
Absolutely.
See you guys next time.
Yep. See
See
you guys
ya.
later.